It's called Design Space Exploration, and it's something that I've been working on for a little while. And it's going to be a series of typographic experiments that I started doing using physical controllers as a means of exploring variable font design spaces. So some of the examples I'm going to show, they're going to be like super experimental, and some are going to be practical, and some are just going to be just fun. But everything that I'm doing is in hopes of being able to push the technologies that are behind them forward, and finding new ways of interacting, controlling, and expressing through a dynamic typography. So just a little bit of a background. I started off in architecture, so not even coming from the type world. And I worked a lot in 3D modeling programs. The one we see here is called Grasshopper 3D. It's a plugin for Rhino. And one thing that allows you to do is construct everything parametrically. So you have components, and then within those components you can have inputs, and those outputs lead to other components, and you can build the model on that. And when I was in school and I was learning this program, I would run into the problem of you have so many inputs, so many like sliders controlling these parameters that you kind of get lost in it, and you want a little bit more of control. And so what's happening in this video is the kind of thing that I was dreaming of at the time. So this kind of interactivity. So after I kind of transitioned to the type world, I still had these thoughts, and they stuck with me. And then after that transition, and just before starting Reading, back in 2015, I was very curious to know if there was even like the typographic equivalent of parametric design. So just kind of searching through the web, I found this mind-blowing experiment. Whoops. Wait. There we go. Let me get that started. By none other than Manuel Van Gabardi, sitting right here. He's a good friend, and actually, is it starting? Is it playing? Yeah. So that's like a funny story. Like I just found out about him. I was like really, like, who is this guy? And then a couple months later, we were classmates at Reading. So it kind of turned out very nice. But when I saw this, like I had that in mind. Suddenly, that triggered a light bulb moment where somehow I have to make that physical controller dream happen for type. And then 2016 came along, and ISType Warsaw. Who was there? Nice. So variable font day changed everything. The world is completely new now. But it was actually really cool to be there and to see the changes come along in the months and years after it. You got to see how quickly variable fonts spread into the browser, and how people began to use them, and there's resources becoming more available, such as Access Praxis. That was like the first one to come along, and that was really exciting to see that build and then grow through all the different kinds of fonts that were continually being added. So this one, Decovar, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's a pretty crazy one. It has 15 axes, and it leads to a question that is often like talked about through Type Twitter and everywhere else. That's like, what kind of interfaces do we build for something like this, where it has so many parameters? Because as you go through something like this, just as an example, if I can, let's see if I can get this here. So you have this first axis. You can change something. Okay, it does change some kind of inline. You're going through, just testing things out. Something's weird happening. And by the time you get to like fourth, fifth axis, you're done. Like the letter looks awful. You don't know like what's actually going on with this. So I mean, it kind of loses the potentiality like that the font actually has. Like it's phenomenal. It's a universe like in itself, but you never really get there. I mean, has anybody had that? Like, has anybody played with through these kinds of big fonts and like had that same experience? So I'm a big fan of making your own tools and like DIY solutions when you can't, like, there's something's not available, you just kind of figure it out even if you don't know how to do it. And so now I was still like determined to make that physical controller dream happen. But you know, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, so you have to always like look and see if people are doing the things that you're looking for. And so I found this guy. His name is Laurie Cape. He's a front-end developer out of Scotland. And when I saw this, it blew my mind. You know, he's taking, so it's called Web Midi Typography, and it's just like a one-off experimental project that he had as a proof of concept, taking web technologies and mixing it with physical interfaces. So he has an input device that's originally designed for music and audio manipulation, and he's repurposing it for the web. And so you're taking every kind of like conceivable typographic parameter that you can control, headings and body fonts and colors, sizes, like you can actually, he's going through it all in real time. So I saw this and like, this is the exact thing I'm looking for. And like, there's a beauty in this kind of world that we live in where it's so global and connected that I can be a kid in Armenia and he's out in Scotland. We can somehow connect and, you know, we can share what we know. So at the time I contacted him, he didn't really know too much about variable fonts, so I shared that information, and then he was kind enough to help me get started on what I wanted to do to expand this kind of a project. So the demos I'm going to show, they're really about a fusion of emerging technologies. And then they take inspiration from a wide set of disciplines. So Web Midi is the thing that enables using MIDI data in the browser. Yeah, so Web Midi is, I could play that again if you want to see it. Okay. So Web Midi is the thing that enables playing MIDI data in the browser, and MIDI is the technology behind, it's mainly for like electronic instruments and electric synthesizers. I remember my first experience was in music class, you know, when you had those like big plastic keyboards and you're going to learn how to play, I don't know, hot cross buns or something weird like that. So that was my first experience with MIDI, but you know, it's like a control, it's a keyboard that has, every time you click some sort of a note, it sends a on-off or a note-off message. So it's a series of messages. Second. So going back to the Decovar example, this would be a lot better if I could show you what it's like from a different perspective, but just to get started, this is what I'm working with. It's a Korg Korg Nano control. It's a MIDI controller, a different kind of MIDI controller than the keyboard. It has sliders, it has knobs, buttons, and each one sends a different kind of MIDI message. So you're able to, what Web Midi allows is being able to take the data that this sends and use it in the browser, and you can take that data and use it to control variable fonts and anything else that is CSS related. So let me just do a hard reset here.
It's back.
It's back?
Yeah, do you want to try it?
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right. And I'm not available. There we go. Now, that's oh my God. Why? I swear it was working. All right. Other people call me. It's not just me calling myself always. Oh, here we go. Here we go. All right. Yeah, I just muted everything. We should be good. Yeah, there we go. So let's just get this thing. I actually went out and bought a selfie stick. I never thought I'd see the day, but there you have it. So yeah, let's get a first-person perspective here. Or
You're done. Make
yeah.
sure that the screen is all just a little bit up so the people on the very back can also
okay.
see just a little bit up. Yeah. There.
Everybody can see it? Yeah. All right. One thing I want to share is a series of design patterns that I found while kind of arranging parameters with this particular controller. So honestly, I don't think you could find if you're just moving one slider at a time. So it becomes a different way of interacting it. So this one is a display font, but let's move on to get that back, but maybe it would be better if I make this a little narrower. The weight, the roundedness. So it's just like these subtle decisions you make first, and then, or important decisions, and then relationships between characters. In the early stage, and then kind of work your way through. You can also control the leading and everything else. So you can establish that first relationship of, do you want the cap height and the ascender? So this was probably this is Whoa, by the way, by Scribbletone. It's like my favorite variable type that came out. I don't know. I experimented with it so much. And again, one more thing with the controller, like it doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be this like big chunk of plastic on your desk. It could be some other way of doing it. So this isn't like some kind of end-all solution, but it's just to get it started. Okay. I don't know whose video this is, but yeah. As soon as I posted that video, and like what kind of got me like excited is that people got excited. It's probably the most viral that I'll ever get, and to see that the reaction that people gave, and I feel like I'm on the right track and that I kind of struck a chord with things. And speaking of striking chords, will we have sound? No sound. Sorry. Well, anyway. So a lot of my inspiration from doing these experiments comes from transferring experiences from other spheres that I've worked in or I kind of get exposed to. So whether it's architecture, music, or video games. A major one of my influences is a good friend of mine named Will Klingenmeyer. He's a sound designer out of Colorado. He works with building sounds parametrically, similar to how I explained with that Grasshopper 3D modeling example, where you have these kind of connections between components and filters, and you produce a sound in a much different way. So we started collaborating together after we recognized that there's a strong correlation between like how I was working and how he was working, and so we decided to fuse our passions in this experiment, taking Whoa again, and Whoa has a couple parameters. One of them is the horizontal and vertical positioning. The other one's a rotational. So we were able to map that to the PlayStation controller, which has a very fluid kind of, obviously gaming experience where you're able to move through those design spaces very seamlessly, very fun. We're just sitting, playing, reliving our childhood. Yeah, and there's no sound, but it's real time. As you're say you're moving further away in that axis and it's getting stretched, think of it as like a digital slinky. It's a map to frequency modulation, so it becomes these high-pitched things, and it becomes you feel like when you're getting into those weird spaces. it's all right. You can check it out. So it's on my Vimeo page. There it is. And actually, it's kind of cool to be going before Joost, because in Warsaw, when I saw his presentation on shape of sounds and sound of shapes. Okay, and one more note on that is there's so many innovative things being done with experimental music, which has like completely changed the notion of music itself. And I think if we keep pushing things in this kind of a direction, we can also find ways of challenging our notion of typography. All right, I'll try to go a little faster. I mean, how much time do I have left? 5 minutes, shit. All right, sorry. Go back to this. All right. So this is a little bit different type of controller. It's called a Leap Motion. It's a hand sensor. It can know the position of your hands, the amount of fingers, where the joints are, and you can take this and map it again to the parameters, and it becomes very, very fluid, very just kind of intuitive feeling. You can see that you can really get in the letters and see where you're going. And moving on. This was a typeface I did with David Jonathan Ross, and I often find myself trying to explain this typeface, and there's a whole backstory behind it with variable fonts, and how I went to India and I found these old gravestones, and how I tried to take those designs, these very unique inscriptions, and take those and apply them to David's original fit. So I always often find myself like explaining to people in these kinds of like hand gestures where, you know, when you have this much width, it can fit in it, and if you have this much, it can fit in that. And so now I think this is going to be like an educational tool where I can just let people play with it and experience like the power of fit for itself. Two more things, and so another one of my typefaces is Spindle. So not all of my typefaces are, have this wonderful variable compatibility. Sometimes designers get them and stretch them for themselves. I know. When I first saw this, I was in shock, and I was like, what did he do? What is that? But it was the first time I ever saw Spindle in use, so I think the joy of that outweighed everything. But it did get me thinking, like, why did this guy get it and stretch it? Like, so I wanted, and it gave like an idea of a way of prototyping ideas, and like to try and get into potential design spaces. Last here. Okay, just a word of warning for the typographically sensitive. There will be a lot of type distortion. So again, taking this tool, mapping it to CSS properties, no variable font stuff. It's just skew, scale, and just trying to play around and find those design spaces that, where it's acceptable, where it's weird, and without even getting into duplicating masters and adjusting outlines, just to get a sense of where should I even try and explore. Because I never even considered doing any kind of wide version of Spindle. I was like, that would never even cross my mind until seeing it. So it's another way of exploring territories that you might have not have considered. And one more time with this, because it's just so much fun.